Have you ever wondered what truly happens behind the velvet curtains of Hollywood? The kind of secrets that don't make headlines, but erase them? December 2014, Malibu Hills, a private estate wrapped in silence and guarded gates. Keanu Reeves, one of the most respected actors of our time, receives an invitation. No studio logo, no film pitch, just 6 words. Just creatives, no agents. Come alone. Inside, there were no cameras, no assistants, no valet, just Diddy, candles, and a dinner table set for two. And then he said it, "My residue will cleanse you." Keanu froze. What began as a cryptic conversation about legacy took a turn so dark, so surreal, that it would come to haunt his career, his nights, and eventually the courtroom. But what if I told you that this wasn't just about one dinner, that Diddy's influence stretches far beyond the music charts, through shadowy Hollywood hallways, silent phone calls at 3:17, and drawers full of leverage marked with names you know? This isn't a scandal, it's a system. And Keanu wasn't the first. Tonight, we'll pull back the curtain on one of the most unsettling testimonies in American entertainment history, a tale of control, power, silence, and water. Because in Diddy's world, loyalty is tested in water. And once you dip your feet in, you don't just get wet. You change. Stay until the end. What you're about to hear will not only disturb you, it might make you question everything you thought you knew about fame, legacy, and the real cost of saying no. The invitation didn't come in an envelope. No gold foil. No manager forwarding it. Just a single message. Slipped quietly through a private channel. 6 words. Just creatives. No agents. Come alone. Keanu Reeves had seen odd things in his decades under the spotlight, but something about this felt different. Not wrong, just hollow, like someone smiling without a soul behind the teeth. The address led him into the Malibu Hills, where the road narrowed and the air thickened. The sun had nearly set, bleeding the last gold across the Pacific horizon. His car crept past the final bend. No valet, no press, no flash bulbs, just a single security guard in a black jacket, standing like a statue beneath the gates. "Identification?" the man asked, without looking up. Keanu handed it over. Then the man reached out, palm open. "No devices." Keanu hesitated. "I wasn't told." "No devices," the guard repeated, like it was scripture, like it had always been this way. His phone was sealed in a velvet black pouch, the kind used to store jewelry or evidence. The gate buzzed, and he drove in. The house wasn't what he expected. Not opulent. Not even warm. It looked like a home built to impress, but never lived in. Designed more for effect than comfort. A long hallway stretched forward like a tunnel, lined with flickering candles, the kind you see in churches or seances. Shadows danced across the walls as he walked. And then there was Diddy. He stood at the head of a long, low dining table, alone, smiling. "Delighted you succeeded," he said, his voice gentle but rehearsed. Keanu nodded, still unsure what to say. The silence was thick. There were no assistants, no background noise except the low hum of hidden speakers playing something ambient, almost like a lullaby soaked in static. He sat. Diddy poured 2 glasses of red wine. No cheers, No toast, just a slow exhale. Then came the first words that scraped at Keanu's nerves. Let's talk legacy. Not scripts, not ideas. Legacy. They didn't speak about movies. Not once. Diddy leaned in and spoke of something else. Something beneath the surface. Power that wasn't voted on or credited. A place beyond the grid, as he called it, where influence flowed like water. Quiet, but absolute. Keanu listened, sipping, watching. The more Diddy spoke, the more he realized this wasn't a dinner. It was a ritual, a gate. And the table they sat at, it wasn't for two. It was for one to make a decision, somewhere deep inside. Keanu began to understand. This night wasn't about creativity. It was about surrender. The wine hadn't settled yet when Diddy leaned forward, his fingers steepled like he was praying or deciding something. You know, he said softly, the thing about legacy is that it demands proof. Keanu held his gaze. No reply. Just the low hum of the hidden speakers behind them. Now playing something more rhythmic, almost ritualistic, like a pulse building beneath the silence. Then Diddy reached under the table, from the shadows. He slid forward a black folder. Smooth leather, unmarked. The kind of object that whispers secrets without saying a word. Keanu opened it. No script, no treatment, no studio name, no watermarked cover page, just a single white sheet. 7 bullet points, printed in a serif font so clean, it felt clinical. But the words weren't clean. They weren't contractual. They were ceremonial. Even when you cannot see, trust the process. You will not speak of this project to anyone. Like the others, you will be reborn when your feet touch the sea. You are not to question. Your reward will be legacy. If you seek money, leave now. You must cleanse. Loyalty endures forever. Keanu read the list twice. His breath slowed. There was no signature line, no dates, just doctrine. This isn't a film, he said, trying to keep his voice even. Diddy smiled, not amused, not aggressive, just sure. You ask too much. Keanu, he murmured. That's why I invited you, because part of you still doubts. A chill rolled down Keanu's spine. Not from fear, from the realization that Diddy wasn't bluffing. He wasn't pitching a role. He was delivering a test. And then, without fanfare, Diddy pulled a small object from his pocket, a black stone, smooth and round, like something pulled from a riverbed. He placed it gently on the table, next to Keanu's glass. When you enter the bath, he said, bring this with you. It marks your first step. The water remembers. The residue remains. Keanu's mouth was dry. He tried to laugh something to break the tension, but Diddy's eyes didn't move. They didn't flinch. You'll enter after me, he said. My assistants will prepare it. You don't speak. You just step in. Keanu stared at him, uncertain if this was theater or psychosis. A method acting prank. A twisted metaphor. Diddy leaned in closer. My residue will cleanse you, he said. His voice now almost a whisper. We're all connected through water. That's why it matters who you bathe with. There was no irony in his tone. No wink. Just conviction. And that's when Keanu understood this wasn't about legacy. It wasn't about a role. This was a right. a baptism, a transaction cloaked in symbolism, except the symbol wasn't empty. It was wet. It was physical, and Diddy was already dripping in it. He didn't run out that night. He walked, quietly, like a man stepping off a stage he never agreed to perform on. No words were exchanged, no arguments, just the sound of footsteps across cold marble, and Diddy's voice behind him, calm, distant. "You'll come back," he called. "They always come back." Keanu didn't answer. Not then. Maybe not ever. 3 days passed. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., his home phone rang. It wasn't the kind of ring that startles you awake. It was slow, intentional, like someone dialing with purpose. He picked up. Silence. Then a breath. Deep, slow. One inhale, held too long, and the line went dead. The first time, he chalked it up to a wrong number, a crossed wire. L.A. Airwaves are always full of ghosts. But the second night, it happened again. Same time, same breath, same silence. By the fifth call, Keanu had unplugged the phone, but it didn't matter. The silence had already moved in. Meetings were canceled, no callbacks. One indie project he'd been nurturing for months gone. Funding fell through, they said, but the look on his producer's face said something else, like he wanted to apologize, but didn't know what for. Another project, a franchise cameo, pulled without explanation. The doors didn't slam shut. They simply vanished. He'd reach for a handle and find only wall. Then came the envelope, tucked beneath his windshield wiper one morning. Black, unmarked, inside a single piece of parchment. Old-looking. The kind you'd expect to see in a museum, not in a Beverly Hills garage. The message, written in perfect calligraphy, unfinished rituals have consequences. No name. No logo. Just one letter at the bottom. S. Keanu stared at it under the morning sun. The ink shimmered like oil. The paper felt oddly warm, like it had been held or whispered to. He didn't show it to anyone, not then, but something inside him shifted. Not fear, not yet, just awareness that something had begun. The silence wasn't random. It was chosen, and he had been unchosen. No headlines, no scandals. Just a quiet turning of the gears behind a curtain he was never meant to pull back. The stage was still lit, the show still on, but for Keanu Reeves, the spotlight had already moved on. It wasn't an invitation this time. No dinner, no candles, just a message passed through a mutual acquaintance. Simple, cold. If you want to understand the system, come see the vault. He didn't say yes, not out loud, but a car still came for him. Black, tinted, no license plate. The driver didn't speak, just nodded and opened the door. They drove through Beverly Hills, as if gliding under glass so smooth, so quiet. It felt unreal. And then they stopped, not at a mansion, but at a structure that looked like an office building swallowed by fog. Concrete, seamless, windowless. Inside, it smelled of ozone and sterile air. The walls pulsed with a faint vibration, like machines humming just out of hearing range. The lights were recessed and soft, but nothing here felt gentle. Keanu followed a silent attendant white gloves. no expression, down a narrow corridor. His steps echoed, but not sharply, as if the place was built to muffle guilt. Then, the vault, not a vault like you'd expect. Not gold, not steel, no spinning wheels or fingerprint scanners. Just a room quiet, clinical, cold as apology. Against one wall stood rows of drawers, identical, matte black, each with a single name engraved on brushed metal. Names he recognized, all of them. Actors, musicians, directors, people whose faces were on billboards, magazine covers, award stages, and Diddy was there, standing calmly, like a priest before the altar. "No need to open them," he said, his voice flat. Keanu said nothing. His breath caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. Diddy tilted his head, almost smiling. "If you had gone into the bath," he said, "you'd have your drawer too." Keanu's eyes scanned the names again. He felt like he was trespassing inside the minds of people he once trusted. And yet, none of it felt illegal. Just inevitable. "Everybody's got leverage," Diddy whispered. "I just make sure mine is neat and tidy." There was no threat in his tone. No malice. Just a kind of exhausted certainty, like he was reciting a law of nature. Keanu stepped back. The air felt thinner now, like it had been filtered too many times, passed through too many lungs. In that room, silence wasn't absence. It was control. It started with faces, familiar ones, people he'd sat beside at fundraisers, shared quiet moments with on film sets, watched struggle through the early grind suddenly. They were everywhere. Magazine covers, franchise leads, instant household names. Keanu would see them, walking red carpets with ease, gracing award shows like they were born in gold. Some of them had been at that table in Malibu, quiet, listening, just like he had. But unlike him, they had stayed. He began to notice the patterns, the speed. One director he barely remembered from an indie project was now helming a billion-dollar studio film. A singer whose career had flatlined 3 years ago suddenly reemerged with a #1 hit and a Grammy nod. Diddy's words echoed back, like something stuck in the corners of a room long after the guest has gone. He soaked for 2 minutes. That's why it just took 2 minutes. At the time, Keanu had thought it was metaphor, some cryptic joke. Now, it sounded like math, like measurement. Those who bathed advanced, those who didn't vanished, and he had chosen silence. But the cost didn't stop at films or roles. It reached deeper, into places that had nothing to do with fame. 4 months after that night, Keanu received a curt email. One sentence: "The board has decided to move in a different direction." It was from a charity initiative. He had helped build something personal, tied to grief, to healing. He had poured time into it. His name had given it weight. Now it had been cut off. No warning, no discussion. He later learned the campaign had received a generous anonymous donation right before his removal. And the new face of the project, an actor he remembered from that long dinner. Someone who hadn't spoken much, but who'd stayed behind after Keanu left. Diddy's whisper haunted him now, heavier than any threat. They always come back. But he hadn't. He stayed gone. And now he watched as the machine moved forward, polished, smiling, merciless, rewarding the soaked, erasing the dry. In that world, loyalty wasn't earned. It was measured in minutes, in silence, in water. The courtroom wasn't cold, but everyone in it was holding their breath, like winter had stepped in. Keanu Reeves stood before them, not as a star, not as a symbol, but as something raw, quiet, exposed. No exhibits, no photos, no recorded evidence, just memory, spoken aloud, piece by piece. And his voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It simply carried, "I wasn't blacklisted," he said, eyes locked forward, unfaltering. "I was erased. Not loudly, not publicly, but with quiet efficiency." The words didn't echo, they settled, heavy, in every corner of the room. Across from him, Diddy sat still, arms crossed, jaw tight, expression unreadable. The man who once filled stadiums now looked smaller than the chair he sat in. In the front row, a juror blinked rapidly, pen scratching furiously across a notepad, as if afraid to forget a single word. Another dabbed at her eye with the edge of a tissue, though no one had cried yet. The air shifted. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about silence. Keanu's testimony wasn't a list of facts. It was a lived truth. Each sentence stitched with the pain of restraint, of knowing something too strange to prove and too heavy to carry alone. He spoke of nights without sleep, calls that didn't make noise, doors that never slammed, but simply dissolved. He described faces once familiar, now distant people who had chosen the bath, people who had risen, and all the while, no one interrupted. Not even Diddy's defense. They objected once. Hearsay. They said, "Voices brittle." The judge tilted her head, eyes never leaving Keanu's. Let him finish. So he did. And the silence that followed wasn't doubt. It was belief, not because he brought proof, but because he brought the one thing no one else had dared to carry into that room: conviction. Unshakable. "I don't stand here to accuse," he said near the end. "I stand because I know what it costs to say no." There was no applause, no dramatic gasps, just stillness. That sacred kind of stillness that only happens when a lie begins to crack under the weight of a truth, with no receipts, just scars. And in that moment, Keanu Reeves wasn't an actor. He was a mirror, and everyone in that courtroom saw a version of themselves in it. He never shouted. Diddy didn't need volume to command a room. Instead, he whispered things that felt like sermons. "We're all connected through water," he had said once. Fingers circling the rim of his wine glass like a ritual tool. Water holds memory. To Keanu, it had sounded poetic at first, almost beautiful. But in hindsight, those words clung to him like damp fog. They didn't fade. They soaked in. Diddy didn't pitch film. He preached purpose. He didn't offer deals. He offered rebirth, and water simple, ancient, inescapable was his altar. Not metaphorical, literal. Everything came back to it. The bath, the stone, the silence afterward. As if stepping into Diddy's water wasn't about cleanliness, but compliance. He made it sound sacred. You don't need applause. He'd said, just immersion. When you emerge, you're chosen. There were no contracts, no cameras, just the unspoken oath of having stepped into his current. You either came out baptized or forgotten. Keanu remembered watching people change after those nights. Not immediately, but subtly. Smiles that stretched too long. Eyes that didn't blink at the right times. Voices polished like glass, but hollow underneath. They didn't speak of the bath. They didn't need to, Because once you stepped into it, you weren't yourself anymore. You became the role Diddy cast you in. Not in a movie, in life. In that circle, fame wasn't earned, it was assigned. Loyalty wasn't felt, it was performed. And individuality, it was shed like clothing left at the edge of the tub. What Diddy offered wasn't opportunity, it was transformation. And in Hollywood, where everyone's searching for a bigger stage, the temptation to let someone rewrite your part was too powerful to resist. But Keanu had resisted, and now he saw it clearly. This wasn't a career system. It was a belief system, a faith with no God, only gatekeepers. And Diddy, he wasn't a producer. He was a priest, not of art, of control. The room was dim, not dark, just quiet enough that shadows lingered longer than they should have. There were no windows, no clocks, just the low, steady hum of something mechanical, always running. Diddy stood across from him, calm, still, between them. A silence stretched like a tightrope, balanced on tension. No anger, no pleading, just waiting. On the table sat the same black stone, clean, smooth, shining under the sterile ceiling light. Diddy didn't ask again. He didn't need to. Keanu looked at the stone, then at the man who had offered him legacy, influence, something far beyond roles or scripts, a part in something older, more secret, more consuming. I get it now, Keanu said softly, voice steady. You're not building careers. You're choosing believers. Diddy's eyes narrowed, not in threat, but in recognition. A beat passed. Then Keanu stepped back. I'd rather fade into nothing, he said, than be remembered for dipping my feet in your water. The stone stayed on the table, unmoved. Diddy's jaw tensed. But he didn't speak. Not a word. He just watched, studied, as if trying to memorize the face of someone he knew would never return. Behind Keanu, the exit was just a plain elevator door. Silent, waiting. He didn't look back as he walked. No handshakes, no threats, no goodbyes. Just before the elevator closed, Diddy finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Loyalty endures forever. The door shut, and that was it. No lightning strike, no dramatic music, just the sound of absence. But Keanu knew what Diddy called loyalty wasn't the kind that came from love, or trust, or earned respect. It was the kind that came from submission, from ritual, from fear. And that kind of loyalty, it didn't endure. It infected, so he left it there, all of it. The stone, the system, the silence, and walked back into the world, not as a star, not as a witness, but as a man who had said no. He didn't return to the spotlight. Not really. The offers still came. Sometimes. Hesitant. Unsure. Like someone tapping on a door they once nailed shut. But Keanu no longer needed the noise. He wasn't chasing legacy anymore. He was chasing clarity. The silence that once wrapped around him like punishment had become something else entirely: truth. Cold, quiet, undeniable. He began to see it everywhere, in the eyes of rising stars who smiled too hard, in the red carpets that felt more like confessionals, in the way certain names seemed to skip every ladder, appearing at the top, untouched, as if by divine right. No one asked how they got there, because no one really wanted the answer. And maybe that's the trick. It was never just Diddy. It was the system. A quiet religion built on obedience and erasure. A moral filtration device that didn't reward talent, only submission. And the bath, that wasn't a ritual. It was a gate, not into art, into ownership. How many others had stepped in? How many had chosen to forget? In exchange for being unforgettable, Keanu thought about that often now, not as an accusation, but as a question. He remembered the actress who passed him at the charity banquet. Years later, just a glance, a whisper. You said no, didn't you? She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't have to. Maybe she had said yes. Maybe she hadn't. But in that second, they both understood the cost of knowing either way. In the courtroom, at the very end, when the judge asked if he had anything else to say, Keanu didn't talk about fame, or revenge, or fear. He said this: silence is no longer neutral. It's complicity. And that's what stuck. Not the bath, not the stone, not even Diddy. But that line, because the truth is, there are more tables like that one in Malibu, more doors without locks, more systems that don't need chains, just rituals and memory. So now, you have to ask yourself, if the invitation came to you, if the stone was placed gently by your glass, if the bath waited, warm and waiting, would you step in or would you walk away, knowing that in doing so, you might disappear? Sometimes, the most powerful rituals aren't performed on stages or under spotlights, but in silence, behind closed doors, where no cameras are allowed. This wasn't just a story about Diddy. It was about what we trade quietly for power, for presence, for the promise of never being forgotten. Keanu said no. And in doing so, he chose something most in his world no longer remember how to ask for peace with oneself. Because, at the end of the day, legacy isn't what others remember you for. It's what you can live with when the applause fades, when the lights cut, and it's just you alone. Some people soak for 2 minutes. Others walk away forever, but only one of them sleeps without looking over their shoulder. The water remembers, but so does the soul. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who still believes there's a choice. And if you've ever stood at your own version of that table, we'd love to hear what you chose.